The story that you're about to hear is a first-hand World War I account by Stanley Roley Mills. It forms part of a much longer recording held in the oral history collections of the State Library, Victoria. For this reason, the story is told in two parts. This is part one. Please note that parts of this account may be upsetting to some listeners.
Stanley Roland Mills. I was born on the 17th of August 1895. I was living at Surrey Hills. My age then was 19. I was the second youngest in a family of one sister and three brothers. My mother was a widow. I was born in Australia, also my parents. The regimental number was 195. It was given to me on arrival at Anzac, where I served with the 1st Division Signal Company. Before enlisting, I had served in the Australian Citizens Forces, which was compulsory at that time in 1914. This training was very useful to me later on. Before enlisting, I had lost my job as an invoice clerk, so rather than look for another job, I decided to join up. There were other fellows I knew who had already enlisted, so that had a certain influence. Also, the employment situation was very bad. Many others enlisted at that time for the same reason. Sturt Street, South Melbourne was the recruiting office where I applied and was given a medical examination and passed fit. Also, particulars were taken of any identification marks about the body, such as scars and vaccination marks, etc. Soon found myself in Broadmeadows Camp, which was a fair distance from the Broadmeadows station. I was in camp at Broadmeadows for about 6 weeks before we went overseas. I remember going down to the boat, the Runic was the name, but the White Star Line it was, and we went down there, and crowds of people on the wharf seeing us off, and all the troops lined up on the rails, waving to their girlfriends, of handkerchiefs being used. Then we had a long voyage which got very monotonous. The little things I remember about it was the first thing I noticed was the porpoises following the boat, hundreds of them. Lots of flying fish. Anyway, this went on for weeks and weeks and weeks, and had a few experiences on board. One of our boys got pneumonia and he died. His name was Humphreys. After weeks and weeks, we got the sight of land. It was Colombo. And at the time, it was a wonderful sight to see land after so long. And then to see this land in the distance, it was an experience that not to be forgotten. I got to do a spot of bother on the ship at about this time. I was a great one for having me underwear clean, and it was pretty hard to get hot, clean water on board ship. And I saw the cook, and I got a Dixie full of water, and I thought I'll do all my washing. And I started to do it, and the sergeant came along. He said to me, "What are you doing there?" I said, "I'm doing my washing, Sergeant." Well, he said, "Get back on church parade. You should be at church parade." Oh, I said, "Break it down." "All right," he said, "you're under arrest." He took me to the guard room, locked me up, and there I was, and I didn't know what to do. About 10 minutes after, one of my mates came along with our officer, not the sergeant, an officer who was in charge of our unit, and he had a few words to say to me, and I explained the position. He right away freed me from the clink. After we left Colombo, there was a lot of entertainment of one thing and another. I remember one of our fellows was one of these ventriloquists, and he gave a show, and then there was another one, he was supposed to be a hypnotist, and he got a lot of the boys, some of our blokes, to line up as stooges for him and did everything he told them to do, and it went over well. I remember that. It was entertaining enough. And then there was the crossing the equator, all sorts of ceremonies going on, and Father Neptune stuff and all that. When we got to Colombo, there was no leave granted to any of us because the troops that had arrived there previously, some week or so before we got there, played up a bit, what with drink and one thing and another, and a lot of damage done in property in Colombo. And of course, when we got there, we had to suffer for it. We weren't granted leave at all. A lot of the boys resented this, and they decided to take leave, and they commandeered the lifeboats and quite a number of them got in, and letting them down by the ropes through an experience. The one end of the boat went down quicker than the other, and it finished up vertical, and all the boys went splashing into the sea. And then others tried in their anxiety to get into the boat. They slid down the rope by hand, and the further they went, the faster they went, and they finished up with blistered hands. Imagine how they felt when they got the salt water into them. We eventually got to Port Suez. The first thing I noticed there was the people around the boat, the natives of that part. They were just decrepit-looking lot. It wasn't their fault. You see the effects of disease and all that sort of thing, and some were limbless and one-eyed people, and it was a sad sight, and I felt terribly sorry for them, I remember at the time. Anyway, we left there, and on our way up to Cairo by train we went, and the thing I noticed particularly there was the intense cultivation of the land. There wasn't a scrap of land wasted. It was all under cultivation. Of course, the irrigation from the Nile was along there, so everything was green. It was quite worth looking at. Eventually arrived in Cairo, and when we got there was a lot of excitement. Have you heard the news? This was the day we landed there, and they were asking us, did we hear the news about the night before? We weren't in it. We weren't there to be in it. What it was a riot in Cairo itself. It appears that one of the Australian boys had been stabbed, and for revenge all the troops went and they wrecked, in the brothels it was actually, they wrecked the places, threw furniture and pianos out of the windows, and it was a terrible state of affairs. And that was the news that greeted us when we got to Cairo. Afterwards referred to as the Battle of the Wazza. I remember on my first leave in Cairo, a young boy, or he'd be about 12 years of age, attached himself to me really in a friendly sort of a way. He could speak English, and I think he was trying to brush up his English. And I asked him quite a number of questions. What school did he go to? He told me he went to the Coptic College. And anyway, while I was walking along with this lad, I noticed I got a lot of bad looks from other Australian soldiers. They didn't seem to approve of it, and I didn't understand. I had nothing against the Egyptians, but evidently they did, and they looked upon me as though I shouldn't have been doing it. And another thing about the Australians' attitude to the native people of Cairo was they were very cruel to them. Why, I don't know, but they used to clean their boots for a price. And these young boys, cleaner boots, Mr. Cleaner Boots, a Kiwi, they used to pester the soldiers, and some of the soldiers who were carrying whips in their hand used to belt them over the shoulder, get out of the way. This is something that stuck in my mind. I'll never forget it. It got that way afterwards that the Egyptian boys, instead of cleaning both boots, they'd only clean one at a time. After they cleaned one, with the other one dirty, they'd say, give it money, because they were used to being robbed. The soldiers used to get them to clean their boots and wouldn't pay them. So they got this idea of cleaning one boot and then asked for the money. Another day while I'm leaving Cairo, 4 or 5 of us decided to take a tram out to Mina, and the very fast trams in Cairo, and on one occasion the tram stopped, and I was eating an orange at the time, half eaten, and as the tram moved to go on, I dropped what I was carrying, a bit of a cane, and I dropped it on the road, and I jumped out to get it, and as I jumped out, the tram went on and didn't wait for me. And it so happened that the conductor was swinging on the side of the tram. In my desperation, I had a shot at him with this orange, but I hit him right in the head and knocked off his fez. And then the tram had to stop, and when it stopped, I got in. A little later, the pyramids got off the tram, and the nearest thing to us was the Sphinx, and I noticed that a big portion of it was broken away. It wasn't complete, and on inquiries I found out that was not hit by French gunfire in a previous war against the Egyptians. Anyway, I eventually got to the pyramids, went down, and we were pestered with guides. Everyone wanted to be a guide. Be a guide, be a guide. And they were rather threatening when we got inside the pyramids. It's rather deep and dark. Guide tried a few intimidation acts, threatening us. This was to make us frightened so that we'd pay up and curve fear into you, make you afraid, thinking that being afraid you'd part out money. But the 2 or three blokes with us wouldn't stand for that sort of thing, and the boot was on the other foot. The Egyptian became afraid. Decided then to climb up the pyramid. What a big structure it is. And it's quite difficult to climb up to the top. We were pretty tired by the time we got there. We've got a good view of all around Egypt. And then there was the inevitable urchin, gibbet, backsheesh, begging all the time. I always wanted something. Poor devil, that's the condition of their life, the social setup. That's the way it was there. Didn't take us long to get a smattering of Arabic language. Talahina, come here, gibbet, backsheesh. Bukra, meaning tomorrow. Stanaswire, stay quiet. Eat Wahed, Kabrit, give us a light for my cigarette. Another thing I remember was the funerals. So it was quite a performance. Of course, you'd see funerals every day. The health of the community there was pretty bad. And there'd be funerals. Nearly every day you'd see a funeral somewhere. And the chanting was going on, and carrying the coffin. It wasn't a very pretty sight. The Egyptian Times, of course, was papers on sale there, and the boys selling the papers. They had all sorts of gimmicks to try and sell them. And I remember on one occasion that they were calling out, Egyptian Times, very good news. Pompey Elliot got the pox, very good news. Egyptian Times, very good news. 10,000 Australians killed, very good news. Of course, they were told to say this, and they didn't know the meaning of it, and they thought they'd sell their papers with it. A friend of mine and I took on a job cooking for the boys. We were sick of parading, and we thought it was a good way to get out of it, so we took on the job to cook stew every day. It wasn't hard to do. But the hardest part of it was washing the utensils after they'd all had their meals, and we had to have everything clean again. So we engaged the services of one of the boys. We call them boys. He was a man, really. And he used to do the washing up for us after every meal for a consideration of a few piastres or something like that. I forget what we used to give him, but it was very handy. To keep up with our knowledge of signalling, my mate and I used to signal when we weren't cooking. We used to go out some distance away with the flags and practice Morse code and semaphore signalling. We kept our knowledge of that up to date. The unpleasant things I remember about my life there in Egypt, there was a hospital at Abyssinia filled with soldiers with venereal disease. That's the side effect of war. That's what war does. It's very unpleasant. I remember the first lot of troops leaving Cairo to go to the front, and at the time we didn't know where it was, and we were seeing them off. We knew it was our turn within a couple of days, but we were seeing them off, and it's rather strange. The civilian population, whenever they saw a soldier watching the troops marching, they'd come up and say, Dardanelles? They seemed to know where they were going. We didn't know where they were going, but they knew more about it than we did. And the next news we got was the papers after the landing on Gallipoli. The papers were full of praise for the wonderful work the Australians had done. But then after that, there was lists and lists of number of casualties. It wasn't a joke this time, it was reality. And then it was our turn to go. And I never felt so frightened in all my life. As only a kid, here we were on a boat, and then lowered into a smaller boat and approached the shores of Gallipoli. And it was just before dawn, very dark, and everyone was told to be quiet, be quiet. They didn't have to tell them to be quiet. They were all quiet with fear, except a few. And those few, the reckless type of blokes, start to strike matches. And then there'd be a cry out, a chorus of voices, put that light out. Put that light out. They put it out all right. You see, we didn't know where we were going. We didn't know what was in front of us. We might have been going into anything. But as it happened, we eventually got ashore, and it was quite calm. The front line was about 1,000 yards away from the beach and was well held in trenches by the infantry, and the troops behind where we were quite calm, cool and collected. And you imagine the feeling of relief we all had when we found that we didn't go straight into battle. I think it was about this time that we got news from Australia that there was a sportsman's 1,000 being organised, and who should enlist in it? Mr. John Wren. That's the last we ever heard of it. He never ever went to the war. I eventually became attached to the 2nd Brigade. It was commanded by General Forsyth. He was a wonderful man, and everybody liked him, but afterwards, when we went to France, this general, during the Pozieres stunts, was so upset with the number of Australian casualties that he refused orders to send any more men into the line. He was cashiered over it. Soon after this, I was sent out to the 8th Battalion. They occupied the trenches, and I was the signaller contact between brigade and battalion. Because battalion headquarters then was the front line. And I remember the way those poor fellows, well, I was amongst them, sleeping in holes, banked up with sandbags in front of them for protection. Fellows going down to the latrines, suffering from dysentery and coming back could hardly walk. And evidently one of the boys, it was too much for him. I saw him, I didn't see him do it, but I saw him a minute after it was done. He put a bullet through the calf of his leg, and he was in terrible pain. He's only a lad. He started to cry. And it turned out that he was imprisoned for self-inflicted wound. He only did it to get away from it. Our diet in those days wasn't the best in the world, mostly bully beef and biscuits. Now and again we'd get bread, and if we were lucky enough to get bread, there'd be 6 would share one loaf, and then you wouldn't get any more for days. But the main diet was bully beef and biscuits, and these biscuits were very, very hard. We used to call them dog biscuits, and to make it a bit tasty, you'd put marmalade on them, or apricot jam, or something like that, and there were so many flies there that you'd have to keep the flies off the biscuit while you brought it up to your mouth. You had to be very quick before you got to your mouth so that you get a mouthful of flies. Water was very scarce. They tried to get water from wells, but it was brackish and couldn't drink it. I think a lot of that caused them some dysentery, being without water, and they'd have a go at this stuff from the wells there, and it was hated in some way and gave them dysentery. The only other water we got was from, they used to bring supplies of it in barges, and naturally you only got a little. You'd fill your water bottle up with it, and that'd have to last you for days. And only wash we ever got was down on the beach, but salt water isn't very refreshing for a wash. So what I used to do, and I'd have a shave and get one of my mates to hold a cup, and he poured it into me hands after I'd shaven, and I'd splash my face with this lovely fresh water, and I'd consider myself I'd had a bath and shower. Whenever we got the chance to go down and swim, we took it. And I remember there was a sunken trawler out about half a mile from the beach. Half of it was sticking out of water. One day, my mate and I were out on this trawler. We'd swum out from the shore and enjoyed it very much. And we're sitting there idly in the sun, and all of a sudden we heard whistling noises going over our head. It suddenly dawned on us that they were machine gun bullets. The Turks had seen us and fired at us. It didn't take us long to get the other side of that boat, and at first opportunity back on the land again. A big problem we had on Gallipoli was the lice. I remember the first time I realised I had lice on me, or nearly had them. We were sharing a dugout with a companion and slept through the night. First thing he did in the morning when he woke up was take off his shirt, and he started to look at it. I wasn't aware of the lice at the time, and I looked at him and I said, "What are you doing?" And here he was looking through, and now and again he'd put his fingers in, pull one out and crack it. And I thought, "You dirty so-and-so." And I was disgusted to thinking, man, it'd have lice on him. It wasn't long before I had them, and everybody else in the unit too. One method we had of trying to exterminate these lice was to get our shirts, and they used to accumulate along the seams at the side of the shirt, and we'd hold this out in position and strike a match and run the match along. You'd hear crack, 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 crack. Some months of this life, time dragged on, and we were all fed up to the teeth with everything. I remember there was a sergeant major, an English sergeant major he was. We were in a group discussing things, and I was foolish enough to pass the remark that I thought it was time the Australians were relieved and sent off, and got somebody else to take their place, because the men were dying of dysentery and one thing and another. And I got the reply from this English sergeant major that I didn't know what I was talking about. He reminded me that this is war, bloody war, don't you understand? It was soon after this that we did get relieved, and we all went to Lemnos Island, some miles away, a little Greek island there, and very flat villages dotted here and there. And of course there was plenty of food to be had, chocolate, fig, grapes and all that sort of thing. And of course we'd been without food so much that we hogged into this kind of food, and the result was that I got got yellow jaundice and I finished up in hospital. Field ambulance hospital made of marquees. I was there a while, I wasn't properly cured, and all of a sudden they bundled us all out of the place and making room for further expected casualties. And it turned out that the next stunt on Gallipoli was to be the Suvla Bay landing. Of course, we were sent back to Gallipoli in preparation for this, and there were two young boys, reinforcements on our unit, had just landed the day before and were sent to aid in the English landing at Suvla Bay. They were evidently short of signallers. These two boys, we never ever heard of them again. They didn't come back. Suvla Bay was a failure, and soon after then, I remember Field Marshal Kitchener visited Gallipoli, and at the time he landed, I was there near the beach it was, with these entourage of Indian generals and whatnot, all dressed up in uniform. I remember one of these Indians. I was standing at attention, of course, and this Indian officer came up to me and he felt my arm. I was pretty fit at the time, only young and brown as a berry, although the food I got on Gallipoli didn't do anything towards making me fit, but I was fit, and he evidently thought I looked all right. In those days, I didn't think about homosexuals, but he might have been one of those. Lord Kitchener was a very attractive-looking man. I suppose he'd be about 6'4", with this great waving moustache, very distinguished-looking man. It was soon after that, as evidently it was his visit that decided on the evacuation. But there was a bit of activity up in Lone Pine before we were evacuated, and I remember having to wake up when I was on signal duty. I had to wake up the brigade major. His name was Carl Jess. Afterwards turned out to be, I think he was a field marshal, Carl Herman Jess. It seems funny that they had Germans in charge of us. With what they call the situation report. It was signalled from the front line to the brigade, and I had to give the brigade major the lowdown on the situation so they'd know what to do. Every time I gave him a message, he'd say, "Righto, Jack." The time came when we had to evacuate the place. We were told to wrap sandbags around our boots, and we sneaked out in the middle of the night. Rice rigged up in the trenches at various places to make the rifles fire so that the Turks would think they were still occupied. It was an arrangement with jam tins, one jam tin dripping water into another when it got to a certain level that the trigger would go off. This is evidently very effective because we weren't molested in any way in getting off us. Just a clear go, and we had no difficulty whatever. We got away. The remarkable thing about that evacuation was there was supposed to be not one casualty, and I quite believed that. But I still think at the time, had the Turks wanted to push us off, they could have. But it paid them to leave us there because it meant that the British Army or Navy were committed to, at great expense, to keep the forces there. I hate to think how we would have fared had we stayed on the peninsula. At the time we left, there was snow on the ground, winter time, and the cold was terrific. We couldn't have survived it. And I remember a lot of the boys were brought out from the trenches with frostbite, trench feet they called it. And they had to be walked up and down on a flat stretch of land there just behind the line to get the circulation back into their feet. I'll never forget that. After the evacuation, it was Lemnos Island again, and we had a real good rest there. Most of the time was spent gambling, playing cards and one thing and another. And a real rest it was, and then we used to go for trips. There was a place named Castro on the other side of the island, and halfway between where we were and Castro was a place called Thermos. And at Thermos there were hot springs, and the Greeks there had baths carved out of the stonework, and the hot springs coming in them. You had a continuous supply of hot water, and we availed ourselves of the opportunity of having a real good hot bath. At first we had for 6 months. During this spell on Lemnos Island, it was near Christmas time. It was then that these famous Christmas billies arrived, and we were very happy to receive them. They were wonderful. What was in them, the contents of them, and particularly the notes from girls in Australia hoping to make a contact with men in the forces amongst us. And there was many a romance formed out of that. Many Australian soldiers married girls that they had contacted through these Christmas billies. A little bit more about Gallipoli while I was there. C.W. Bean, official war correspondent. Very tall, distinguished-looking bloke with red hair. Then there was General Birdwood, a dapper little man with a beautiful dugout, army blankets on the floor as carpets. My word, they looked after him. There was a chap named Corporal Dean. He won the DCM. It was just before I landed at Gallipoli. Our unit was sent down to Cape Helles in a battle there and loaned to the English army there for a few days. And during the battle, there was a Brigadier Mackay who was wounded. And this chap Dean saw the position he was in, wounded and couldn't walk, and he picked him up and put him on his shoulder and took him away to cover and safety. George Dean got the DCM for that. Little story here about Beachy Bill. Beachy Bill was nicknamed on account of the gunfire that came from each side of our position on Gallipoli, where the Turks fired artillery shots at the beach where all the boys were in bathing, and sometimes they caught us, and you'd see blokes running out of the beach, blood pouring from them, and on one occasion one of our blokes was hit in the arm, and it was nothing very serious. At all events, he went to hospital and got out of the war for a while over it. I had a narrow squeak on Brawns Hill one day. A shell landed within yards of where I was standing. It was what they called a howitzer, a kind of shell that fired high into the air. The idea was to get behind the hills and fire high and then come down and lob on the position they wanted. Well, on this occasion, a house shell landed within yards of me. It was so near that I saw the thing hit the ground, and it turned out to be a dud. It didn't go off. There was a young bloke with us named Paget Hughley, and I never saw anyone so game in all my life. It was during the Suvla Bay landing, and a lot of shell fly about, and he was out tracing a telephone line, and he was trying to find the break. And it was just on a ridge, very near to the headquarters, brigade headquarters, and the shell fire was so thick, I don't know how he escaped, but he kept on with the job, kept going all the time. He was so game. Later in France, he was killed, and I wasn't a bit surprised because he was so game he'd go anywhere. A very young reinforcement lad arrived, and he was very inquisitive. And he just got up into the trenches. He was only there minutes, and he said to the other fellows, start to climb up above the parapet, and they pulled him down. Oh, they said, don't do that. You won't last long if you do that. He didn't take any notice of them. He got up again, put his head up, and bang, hit right through the centre of the forehead.